Hello everyone, I'm Wes Kale. Welcome to the program. Today's discussion we're going to look at meeting management. This is actually the first of a series of videocasts we're going to do on meeting management. And as you may have gathered by the title on today's discussion, we're going to take a somewhat different tack on meeting management. We're not going to look at traditional topics dealing with meeting minutes and agendas and things like that. Instead, what we're going to try and do here is to give you a broader appreciation for the underlying dynamic of what happens in meetings, so that as you go through our other videocasts on meeting management and the related topic of decision making, you'll develop a level of comfort and mastery in navigating the meeting environment. Okay, so let's look at the topics we're going to discuss today. The first topic is what we're calling is and nots. Meeting management is a very, very broad topic with all sorts of areas that we could dig into. And what we want to do here is narrow the focus down to what it is that we're going to talk about, as well as redlining out those things that we're not going to be talking about. The specific area we're going to focus on is this thing called coordination meetings. As you see in the second topic, there are various types of coordination meetings, and we're going to walk through what those are at a summary level, and then drill down to a specific type of coordination meeting, something we call a problem resolution meeting. That is what we really want to pay attention to. We're then going to take a moment to look at roles. There are many different roles you can have in a meeting, but there are four in particular that we want to spend a little time understanding. The next three topics, why we meet essentially, what is going on, and why we meet really, all bring out the central theme of problem resolution meetings, and that is that there may be more going on in these meetings than meets the eye. And that is, you may have the stated reason, what we call the essential reason for calling a meeting, but there may be an underlying true reason why we're all in this room together. Okay, turning first to is and nots. The discussion today is focused on coordination meetings. And these are meetings that are meant to either establish or transmit the who, what, when, where, and why of matter that is before the organization. Organizations face all sorts of issues, and you need to be able to identify the who, what, when, where, and why, and how of what you're going to do to address these issues. And as we'll see, inside the coordination meeting domain, we're going to focus particular attention upon problem resolution meetings, as these comprise at least half the meetings that you're going to sit in over the course of your career. Now, what we're not going to discuss are meetings whose objectives are different than problem resolution meetings, i.e. we're not going to be talking about non-business topics like how to run a social club or to manage the church committee or Boy Scout meeting that's taking place this week. We're also not going to be addressing conference and sales presentations or seminars and training. Although these are all business-related type meetings, they're not focused upon operational challenges, so we're not intending to address them at this point in time. If we hear from you folks that you would like us to develop instruction on these topics, we will do so, but for the moment we're going to let this pass. We're also not going to be addressing procedures that may apply to business meetings. We're not going to be talking about parliamentary procedures. We're also not going to discuss agendas and meeting minutes, at least in this particular videocast. We will address this in a later videocast. We're also not going to address meeting planning or administrative topics such as how to sign people up and how to make sure name tags are properly ordered and what seating charts look like. There are already a great many organizations that provide services or training on these topics, and so we're going to let them pass, unless, of course, we hear differently from you. So that is what we are and are not going to talk about today. Let's move on to the different types of coordination meetings. There are basically four: an information meeting, a decision meeting, a coordination meeting, and a problem resolution meeting. And these four types of meetings are not some rocket science that we've dreamed up for this particular videocast. There's actually a body of knowledge out there that speaks to these topics, maybe using somewhat different names or labels, but fundamentally they identify these four types of meetings. Looking at the first one, information meetings, the objective of this particular meeting is to inform the audience. This is basically an outbound communication to a large group of people to make them aware of something that is going on. In general, there's no expectation that there will be feedback or response or any other outcome that is required of the audience. This is merely an outbound communication to the group, and they can do with it what they will. Some good examples of this would be town hall meetings in large organizations, or your department and division meetings where the senior leaders provide you an update on important matters before the organization. Next, decision meetings. Now, as the name implies, the objective of a decision meeting is to obtain a decision on a pretty well-defined problem. So basically, you're trying to establish the who, what, when, where, and why of what we're going to do on this particular problem. How these meetings unfold is that typically information will be provided to the decision maker in advance of the meeting, so they have a chance to mull it over and come prepared to the meeting. Then when the meeting takes place, there will be a quick refresh of the information that's been provided at this point in time. There will be a Q&A session. Any additional information will be provided that's necessary. And once the manager is comfortable that they have the information they need to make a decision is provided. Now, this meeting assumes that you have a single decision maker, but in many cases, there may be a group of folks who are meeting in order to achieve consensus on what they want to do. And we provide a couple of examples of the kinds of decisions that will be made in this type of meeting. Next is a coordination meeting. These meetings are sort of a downstream of the decision meeting, in that we're not going to be determining what the problem is and what we're going to do about it and how we're going to do it. Those things have already been determined. What we're doing here is making sure that the rest of the organization understands what the problem is and what we're going to do about it, and knows what their particular role is in addressing the problem. So while we may cover all of the who, what, when, where, why, and how in this meeting, in general, it's execution focused. We're looking at the tactics of how we're going to do things. We're not looking at the direction we're going. The direction has already been set. And we provide a couple of examples here of the kinds of topics that will be discussed in a coordination meeting. And this brings us to the problem resolution meeting. And the objective here is to understand a problem before the organization and to develop a solution to this problem. Now, many problems that come up in an organization are just transactional in nature, and they can be dispatched via an email or a phone call or perhaps a hallway chat. However, what we're focused on here are those problems that the originator of the meeting feels are so significant that it's worth calling a meeting in order to get together and discuss it. And what you should understand about these types of meetings is that typically the problem may not be clearly or commonly understood. It may just be a nebulous thing that one person's worried about, and we may find out that when we get everyone in the room, half the people in the room don't think there is a problem, and the other half don't think the problem's theirs. Further, because the problem may be undefined and the issue so fresh to all the participants, the solution that comes out of these meetings may be of varying degrees of abstraction. You can come out with just a general directional concept of what we want to do going forward, or at the opposite extreme, you may come up with a very detailed plan that identifies who's going to do what on what dates, or anywhere in between. So these meetings are sort of a free-for-all as the group tries to figure out what they're going to do about a specific problem. And what you have to understand is that these types of meetings are going to account for over half the meetings that you attend. Now, I've mentioned different types of meetings. I wanted to give you a little graphic here that might illustrate what I'm referring to, but it may be some helpful context. And to orient you a little bit, you'll see we have this rounded orange rectangle of coordination meetings, and there are 4 smaller rounded rectangles within inside of it. And this largest of the rounded rectangles, that is our problem resolution meetings. And then we have information meetings and decision meetings and your coordination meetings. Okay? What you should also understand is that we've got decision making that takes place in group environments and individual environments. And what we're seeing here is that when we have group decisions taking place inside a meeting environment, which makes sense, problem resolution type meetings make up the majority of the type of decisions we're going to make in a group setting. There'll also be the occasional decision meeting that performs a similar service, but those be much less frequent than problem resolution meetings. There's also some types of group decision making that take place outside of a coordination meeting forum, but in this discussion we're not going to get into these. Now, for our premium members, you'll find in the template section a smaller show which actually talks about this particular graphic and delves into what these meetings are and how they relate to one another. With the rest of our listeners, all we want to do is provide you some context that problem resolution meetings take place in a larger coordination meeting and decision-making context, and it's helpful to maintain that perspective as we go forward. Now, Kale Partners views problem resolution meetings as the most difficult meetings to manage because they entail the 3 multiples: multiple actors, multiple factors, and multiple vectors. What we mean here is when we say multiple actors, there are going to be any number of folks who are involved in this from different departments, and we don't necessarily know where the conversation is going to go and whether we have the right people involved, the right number of people, the right levels of people, etc. And all of their interests have to be borne in mind as we manage the discussion. Furthermore, when we say multiple factors, what we're referring to here is that any issue that comes up for discussion is going to have a number of aspects to it. And each one of those aspects will be a topic of discussion and part of the ultimate solution. Unfortunately, the information that we have on each aspect will be imperfect or incomplete, and we still have to kind of muddle through. Further, we're going to have to cope with the fact that each one of these actors may have a different perspective on the issue, and then we have to boil all that down into some sort of solution that works for the folks in the room. Finally, once we've decided what to do, each one of those actors is going to have to leave that meeting and do their part, which means we're going to go down multiple different vectors for implementing the solution that we all agreed to. And so the meeting management challenge is to make sure that we're able to get through all this stuff and come up with a coherent plan that works for everyone. But the fact of the matter is that once the meeting is done, you still have the follow-up issue of making sure that all the actions that were agreed to were actually executed on. Now, as we said, the 5 W's, the who, what, when, where, why, and how, are all up for debate here. We have to figure out what we're going to do and in what order and reach an agreement that we're all willing to be bound by. So in essence, a problem resolution meeting is a hybrid of a decision meeting and a coordination meeting all in one. But what makes it so difficult is that planning and negotiating of what we're going to do all takes place on the fly and consequently places great demands upon the judgment and leadership skills of the participants. It is these attributes here at the bottom that make these particular meetings so interesting and what opens up the opportunity for a separation to occur between the stated reason for having the meeting and the real reason for having the meeting. But we'll talk more about that in a moment. Right now what I want to do is look at meeting roles. In a meeting there will be many different roles, but 4 of them are relevant to us. Those 4 roles are the participant, the facilitator, the decider, and the accountable person. Now, of these 4 roles, probably only the facilitator looks like one of those conventional roles that you're familiar with. But what these 4 roles all have in common is that they're all focused upon advancing the discussion around the problem that the meeting was called to address. And these roles cut across the titles, the positions, and the departments that each participant may be in. These roles are very results-focused roles and are not titular in nature. Let's take a look at each one of them. A participant is anyone who attends the meeting regardless of their activity level within the meeting. They play a powerful role as a witness to what takes place, something we'll talk about more on the next slide. The second role is that of facilitator. This is the person who moves the discussion along. Now, ostensibly, this role should be assigned, and it should be the person who makes up the agenda. But often, neither of these things happen. What happens is that someone calls a meeting and folks just show up. Interestingly, as often as not, the person who calls the meeting will show up unprepared as well. In fact, they'll sit down, look around the table, and say, okay, so where do we stand? No one points out that, hold on, you called this meeting, maybe you should know where things stand. Now, if it's the boss calling the meeting, that's one thing. But this is just an interested stakeholder, one of your peers calling a meeting, or maybe it's even their meeting, and they start off the meeting by asking, where do we stand? That's generally a sign of a real problem. And quite often, no one is so rude as to point that out. But what's even more interesting is what happens next. So the next time you're in one of these meetings where everyone gets together and it's really not clear what we're meeting about, and someone, either the caller of the meeting or the most senior individual says, so where do we stand, or something like that, watch very carefully what happens next. Because what you're probably going to see, like a bunch of Hindu cows being called to dinner, all the heads will slowly gravitate to the one person that everyone's looking to have the answers on where we all stand and to be told what to do. And you've just found the true leader of this group. Regardless of the titles, regardless of the positions on the org chart, the individual that everyone is looking at is the person who has the leadership role on this particular topic. And the herd is just waiting to be told what to do. It's kind of interesting, it's kind of sad, but you need to look for it because it's very informative. So let's move on to the next role, that of the decider. The decider is pretty straightforward. This is the person who decides what's going to be done on a given issue. Now, given that a problem resolution meeting will have multiple transactions, multiple issues that will be addressed, okay, it is quite often the case that there will be multiple deciders. Who decides on issue number 1 may not be the person who decides on issue number 2. And that's one of the challenges of this meeting, is to keep track of who's deciding, what the decisions are, and who's going to execute those decisions. And that's where the accountable person comes in. This is the person who is tapped as being accountable for carrying out all or some of the components of the decision that the decider made. Now here's an illustration to pictorially represent this. Suppose we got a bunch of folks who are gathered together to have a meeting on a given subject. If we were to draw a line around all of them, they would all be participants in the meeting. But these participants can be usefully divided into 2 groups, those who are on the periphery and those who are central to the discussion. The folks who are central to the discussion will be comprised of your facilitator, your deciders, and your accountable individuals. What we have to remember is that roles are going to be fluid in this discussion. Whoever decides on one topic, we've tapped this individual here on the left to be the decider on one topic, and he's going to assign responsibility to these 2 accountable individuals in order to execute his decision. But just because he was the decider on topic A doesn't mean he'll be the decider on topic B. This woman over here may be the decider on topic B, and in the discussion around topic B, she identifies that she has a role in executing the solution, as well as this other individual, so both of them will be accountable for executing the decision.